So this is basically the costume that I'm making, minus the coat and minus the bag and the backpack. Yeah. But the main elements here are the pants, the vest, the shirt, and the cape. Those are the pieces that I have to construct. I don't have any of it. This is one of those costumes where hobbits are really easy to thrift, but it's a very boring costume. So I've decided that I want to try and just faithfully reproduce it as my attention span can allow. So let's dive a little bit deeper. It's surprisingly hard to find just photos on the internet of like the costume. And as much as I would love to sit through 9 hours of movies, by which I mean 12, I can't do it. I don't have the attention span for that. So I'm going off of what I can find online, and that'll be accurate enough for me. The shirt is just a very simple shirt. It's a little bit different from the setup of the shirt that I'm using now. And I'm actually going to use this pattern as the base, and I'll kind of explain how I'm changing that up while I'm making the pattern. The vest is a very simple vest. Because I'm not going to be putting any darts or anything in it, I will also be using this shirt pattern to make that, because it's basically just the front of the shirt with a smaller shoulder that drops down with a flat bottom. And then, of course, a welt pocket that you can't see in this photo. The pants are ones that I will have to completely draft from scratch. They're a pair of false front breeches. Keep calling them trousers, but because of the length, they're breeches. They're very loose fitting, which is great for me because I don't like tight fitting pants. And this is I really fucking hate these style of pants. But because I do so many pirate cosplays, I'm just gonna fucking make this pattern. And then I can use it whenever the hell I need it in the future. I'm going to be altering the pattern a little bit because I don't want, see how that's gapping in the crotch? I don't want to do that. So I'm actually going to be making not a very authentic version of these, but I'll be keeping certain things like there's a very large hem on the bottom of here. The length and the fit basically I'm keeping, but this front I'm redoing. And the last thing is the cape, which is a very simple pattern that I'm actually going to be basing off of a cape that I made for my Bilbo cosplay, which basically I'll be kind of just freehand cutting, basically. So I'll get to that when I get to it. So these are the sketches of the pattern pieces I'm going to be doing. So this is the shirt. Essentially what I'm going to be doing is, where the edge of this seam allowance is basically the center of the shirt. And instead of cutting it there, I'm going to be putting on a fold and adding in this kind of like yoke thing, which I'm sure is a better name than that will actually fold over. And then I can put a little notch here. And instead of this 2-part collar, his is actually just a single piece, which actually has some like hand stitching on the edge that I'm hopefully going to remember to do. I'm also going to lengthen it about 6 inches, just because the pattern that I have is not really designed to be tucked in. The sleeve I am going to have to make all on its own. It is a much wider and longer sleeve than the sleeve that I have for this pattern, but it's a very simple pattern. And in the bottom, it has a cuff on it, which is basically just kind of a big piece of triangle that I'm going to put a little button there. Alright, so these are the fabrics that I've collected. We got the cape, the vest, the shirt, and the pants. The shirt is just kind of a standard muslin. I'm actually going to be making 2 simultaneously, one for the Samwise cosplay, and one that's actually more based off of Bilbo or Frodo's shirt that I'm just going to use as kind of like a general steampunk shirt because I don't have one. The main difference is just in the front and the collar. I'm making this front piece is I've just got a piece of paper and I folded it over, placing my regular old shirt pattern on top of it, which this is kind of this is actually the center here. But when I cut out this pattern, it's also going to cut out that fold, and I'm going to use that to create the yoke that will create kind of a self-lining here. It's going to extend the bottom down, which will just make it a little more tuck-friendly. Now that that's cut out, I'm flipping it over, drawing a 3-inch strip from the folded edge, and then kind of extending that up into the shoulder here. I've also marked my notch point, and what this is going to make, it's a little hard to see in this photo, but he has a little bit that sticks out there, and then the collar actually starts a little bit further out, and so making that little notch there will give me that shape. Now unfolded, it has this kind of funky shape here, but that front piece is done. Back piece doesn't really change. I'm just adding the 6 inches to the bottom. This would really help if I actually use the back piece to trace. What's nice about using an existing pattern like this is that I already know it already fits. I don't have to worry about adjusting anything. I can just make it and be assured it'll fit. The sleeve is symmetrical. I can do this on the fold again. I'm going to be using the shirt pattern again for a very loose base. The sleeve is pretty much the same as the one I've got here, only there's a bit of a gather right here at the very top, which is just literally making that pattern a bit wider. I achieved that by just pulling it a bit away from the edge here. I kind of pre-measure what the looseness of the shirt I want it to be. This shirt's going to be about 24 inches by the bicep, about 18 by the cuff. I've scooted my piece to about where that 24-inch mark is. I've just kind of very loosely traced that shape. Marked down my sleeve length, which is 26 inches. I think might actually be a little too long, but it's a lot easier to shorten a sleeve than to lengthen it. Marked out my 18 inches, then I connect the dots. So there's my sleeve pattern. The sleeve cuff, I'm just doing kind of a very slight curve. It needs to be 9 inches wide. I've got this on the fold again. Measure out 4.5 inches. Draw a line up, making it 3 inches long. Add the seam allowances, and there I've got a cuff. And that is the shirt pattern. So I'm also basing the vest pattern off of the shirt. I'm just going to quick do that. Mark the seam allowance and then my center front. I'm mostly using this just to get the right angle for the shoulder. Now I don't want my vest to be the same width as my shirt. So I'm going to go in about a 1/2 inch here and just kind of mark that. And maybe about 1 inch into the side here. I'm going to use the approximate edges of the shirt for my vest width. And then again, I'm going to go about an inch or so below the arm seam here. I've rounded out the top of the vest, added seam allowances, and rounded out the arm. Measured out the length that I need, divided in where my welt pocket will go, and basically repeat this process for the back, minus the pocket, obviously. On the back, I usually put some sort of like clasp or closure to tighten it, but in this like official sculpture, that is the back of the vest, and there's nothing back there, so I'm not doing anything. Back to the pockets, a rectangle for the flap, for the pocket line, a folded piece of paper, a rectangle the same size, mark how long it can be, I like to do a rounded edge, and there's the pattern piece for that. The vest pattern is done. So I almost forgot the shirt collar, using the shirt pattern as a base, and just making it a rectangle. Very simple. Alright, so I'm drafting the pants now. There might be an easier way to do this. This is just how I've always done it, and it's turned out okay. I do not claim to be great at this. I actually hate drafting pants, but I've used the commercial patterns to make these pants, and I hate those patterns more, so we're just going to try this and see if it works. So I start with a center line here. This is supposed to be what essentially become like the outer line of the leg. We'll see how far that gets. Flip this upside down, so this is where the waistband is. I've drawn 3 lines 1 inch apart. The middle line here will be where my hip is. This 1 inch down line will be where my waist is, and 1 inch up will be the back. Because if you wear a pair of pants, typically the front doesn't sit quite as high as the back does. These are actually going to be worn pretty high. Normally this is actually a bigger dimensional change, but I'm just doing that slight inch for these pants. And hopefully I don't have to adjust it. We'll find out. I've measured the distance that it has to be for half around my, this will be kind of be where my stomach is basically. And I can just kind of create that line connecting all those little points, and that'll be what I'll attach the waistband to. Flipped it back around, so now I can take that measurement that was where my hip was and measure out the length of the pants, which are 20 inches, plus an additional 2 inch little piece in the bottom here. Measured out the width of my bottom hem, which is 20 inches in this one. Now this is where it gets messy, because it's kind of a lot of trial and error. I want 30 inches at least for where my thigh will be, but I need the front seam, where we go between the legs, to be 16 inches and the back seam to be 20. And the 2 seams that will form my inseam need to be 10 inches. And so basically I kind of have to play around with it until all those measurements meet up, and that'll take some time. Right, this pattern looks very silly, nothing at all like pants. I'm going to kind of tape it together and try it on, which sounds ridiculous, but it's a good way to at least see if I'm on the right track. I hate the fact that we're just not going to talk about it. So that's what my thigh skin would look like. Good to know. Now here for the front. The fall front thing is really weird and complicated. I'm going to make mine 8 inches wide. It's going to be centered on this center crotch seam here. I'm going to make it 6 inches deep, which means I need to measure over 4 inches and mark down 6. And that is going to be where my stitching and cutting line to make the front will be. Actually, I forgot to be extending this up an inch, so I actually only need to measure out to 5. Alright, bump that up an inch. Squiggle that out so I don't forget and accidentally cut that part. So that is what my front piece looks like. I'm making an exact copy on another piece of paper, right up against that little cut line. That'll be my facing. I've just added a gentle curve on the bottom here, just for comfort, and yeah, I'll be serging the edge just to finish it off. Okay, this piece is kind of weird. This is the piece that goes kind of behind the fall front, and since my front is 8 inches wide, I need to make this 4.5, so it'll overlap an inch to put the buttons. This is only the 5 inches because we're going to be putting the waistband above this. Just kind of curves to create the hole. Yeah, you'll see later. Also, the seam allowances on the edge that are going to be up against the cut edge are going to be 1/4 inches instead of the 5/8 that I'm doing everywhere else. Alright, this is kind of the tab. These will go on either side of the fall front, and with the 1/4 on each side and a little point at the bottom. That waistband is just a 3-inch piece I'm going to fold over. Bottom cuff's basically the same thing. And a tab to put some grommets and cord in to adjust the waist as needed. That's the pants pattern. Alright, now we get to cut out the fabric. For people who remember before, I had a lot of issues with this fabric because I accidentally washed it with a fabric that bled dye all over everything. And I mostly got it out, but there's still little marks and some bleach got on here. And it's just kind of messy. I have 2 pieces. This piece isn't quite as bad. I'm going to try and kind of squeeze the pieces around those. So I'm obviously having to cut out big chunks here, which is kind of screwing up with everything. I think I am going to have to skinny up the sleeve a little bit just because it's almost wide enough. That'll reduce the amount of fabric that I need by quite a bit if I can get 2 out of the fold instead of having to do 2 separate things. I was able to fold it the other way, which won't match grand lines, but this doesn't have a huge stretch the other direction, so I think it'll be okay. But I can keep the full width of the sleeve, so we're good. Alright, shirts are cut out. Now I move on to the vest. Vest is pretty straightforward. Spent a decent amount of time trying to make sure that all the lines are kind of straight. I tried to match them as best I can, but it's a little difficult with this small of a line. I did try to kind of line up the pattern piece of the pocket welt with where the hole I want to be. I'll probably end up just actually kind of matching up where the pattern is on this and then putting the hole wherever it is. But yeah, I'm just going to quick cut this out. Same thing with the lining, which is just a linen. So pants are pretty much the same way. For the cape, I'm not going to use a pattern because it's really just 2 pieces. First thing is I just got to cut a really big half circle. And kind of how I'm doing this is kind of similarly to how to fold and cut a snowflake. So I've got basically kind of a big square. I'm going to fold the corner fold in half, and then fold in half again. I've also pinned a tape measure. Just use that to make an even line all the way through, and then I just cut on that. And same thing up in the front for the neck hole. I'm just using my old hood as a pattern for this new hood, but you can kind of see the general shape. It's on the fold here. Right now, with everything cut out, it is time to start sewing. I'm going to start with the shirt. I'm starting with putting some fusible interfacing on the collar sections, and I like to go in and pin as much as I can, and then kind of do one round of stitching, and press and trim, pin, and then do another round of stitching, and kind of doing that. And remember, I'm doing 2 at the same time. Alright, there it is all pinned. Now, because I'm using the same thread on all of this, you can do what's called chain piecing or chain stitching, where instead of when I finish a piece pulling it off and cutting the thread, I finished off and then just stitch right onto the next piece. So this saves thread, saves a little bit of time. You should definitely give it a try if you haven't tried it before. So now I'm kind of ironing everything after I've stitched it. Right, so I've sewn most of the main part of the shirt, but on the collar, there's this kind of like stitching detail along it. You can kind of see it right there. So I'm just taking a contrasting thread and I'm just gonna stitch it. There we are. That gives it kind of a nice little home stitched feel. And so all that's left is to finish the sleeves and attach them. And also buttons. I'm making the sleeve cuff. Left a little slit in the seam of the sleeve. And just hem that up. And on the edge I've done a basting stitch. So a very wide stitch. About 1/4 and about like 1/2 an inch from the edge of it. So that when I stitch it'll go right between those 2 lines. I pull just 1/2 of the thread. And that gathers it up. Pin it to one piece of the cuffs that I sewed earlier. You can see my regular stitch goes right in between the 2. From the corner a little bit, and clip the curve, flip it, and then tuck everything in, pin it down. I'm just going to top stitch right along that line, and there's a cuff. Alright, so I'm finishing up the shirt. The sleeves are pretty basic, but because they are extra wide, I just put in another 2 layers of basting stitches, and I'm going to gather right at the shoulder. Alright, just like that. Also serge that inner seam. Now I'll just put on the other one, and the 2 more on the Bilbo shirt. Now to place the buttonholes, I'm going to use this tool, which is a buttonhole spacer, and it opens up evenly. And so I know where to mark the buttons and know that they'll be evenly spaced. The buttonholes are sewn in. Can't forget the ones on the cuff. There's the shirt all finished, which means the pants are next. Alright, so I've sewn the legs together, and I've already taken them in just a little bit, but I'm going to do a basting stitch here, and try them on just to see if I need to do any more adjusting. I really hate these style of pants. I'm getting kind of a weird crotch thing going on here, so I'm going to mess around and see if I can fix that. It's a little better, but important I can still squat. Now I'm going to make these changes that I've made on my pattern so that when I make my next pair, I don't have to worry about doing all this adjusting crap. Now I'm going to undo that stitching I just did, trim everything down properly, and then sew it for real. Actually only sewn half of that middle crotch seam because I'm going to be working very heavily on the front here. It's going to be a lot easier to do all this without the back in the way. And then pretty much from this point forward, I am following a tutorial I found on YouTube. How to sew Regency fall front trousers with waistband from Costume Making with Mrs. B. It's the only one of these that I've seen that actually made sense, so I'm giving her due credit. She's going to be able to explain it way better than I can. I am using this broadcloth as a lining. You won't be able to see it other than when it's open. Damn, I forgot to search that. But this fabric is very thick, and there's going to be multiple layers right here. So having thinner fabric to kind of take up the spot so you won't even see is going to help me greater later on. Essentially what's happening here is where those lines I drew, I'm going to end up cutting down, and on each side of it, I'll be sewing these tabs, as well as what will become the actual middle part that I'll connect. So kind of be sewn like this, with the lining down, and then when I flip everything inside out, it should create what I'm hoping will work out. We'll find out. So those tabs are sewn into the lining here, and I'm sewing the little flap here, which is the one side, because when I flip it inside out, I'm going to stitch this along, and hopefully encase the seam. In theory. Okay, hopefully that worked. Now I slice down the middle here, creating kind of a Y shape at the end. Alright, now I'm going to flip everything out and press it really well. Okay, it was a little confusing, but I eventually got there. So now I just have to sew down these little tab ends. You can see that kind of hides all the stuff that's under there. That was a little messy, but it is good looking, which means that I can sew up that last of the seam and then attach the waistband. Install. The only thing left is buttons and buttonholes. So on Sam's pants, there's just buttons in the top corners here. There is not buttons in the middle here, which I think is dumb because the other hobbits have it, and it looks weird. So I'm putting one there too. And then on the inside here, just a really big one on the waistband and 2 smaller ones to connect these little flappy things. That's what it looks like on the inside, and that's how it looks on the outside. Now I'm also going to sew these buttons on so the suspenders can attach. Okay, for the vest, starting off with making the welt pocket. This is just the flap that I've stitched, and I matched the stripes pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I've marked with pins the box that I need to line up. The box that's actually drawn on the pocket piece. Stitched it on 3 sides. Doing my best to line up the line. Stitch, cut, flip, stitch, and there's a welt pocket. Now I've sewn the front and the back of the vest together, just at the shoulders. Same thing for the lining. Now I have to sew those 2 pieces together. I attach the 2 sides, leaving the side seams open so I can flip it inside out. I'm just kind of clipping the curve. I flipped it out and pressed it, so now I'm going to stitch the sides together with the right sides together. And then there's just this little kind of opening left. I'm just going to kind of whip stitch closed just by hand. I'm going to use this again. And that's it. Means next up is the cape. And so most of the work on this is actually just going to be hemming. So I have to hem this giant semicircle and all the way down. And to make life a little easier, I'm going to be pressing down an inch, so just like that, and then tucking it under and giving that a press. And that'll keep it in place without having to use pins. Now for the hood, I did the same thing with the hem, but for the back seam, I'm actually going to do a French seam. With the wrong sides together, so opposite of how it normally would be, I'm just going to stitch down a 1/4 inch seam. And I like to trim it down to about 1/8. Technically, I don't need to, but I like it. And I flip it inside out and stitch again at 3/8 inch. And that creates a seam that is finished on both sides, which is just a bit more seamly than any other option. Now to attach the hood to the actual cape part, do a flat felt seam or lazy flat felt seam. So I'm just going to stitch a normal 5/8 seam allowance. I'm going to press the seam up, and I'm going to trim this inner one. Then I'm going to fold this in, and I pressed it down, and now I'm going to stitch along that edge. And then that just creates a more seamly seam that's also more comfortable around the neck. Alright, and then I put in this very large hook and eye as the closure. And then I attach the leaf brooch, which is gross and old, but the elves were cheap. And that means that the cape is done. And I said I wasn't going to make a bag. I've been kind of thinking it over, and I decided I'm going to do it. We got this kind of material, a very thick kind of denim-y material. I ripped 2 strips of that material, and I'm just stitching them together. So the strap is done. Now I've just kind of ripped another long rectangle and stitched on these kind of faux patches just to make it look a little more weathered and beat up. I've just kind of folded it in half with enough place for the flap that goes over it. Stitched on the side. And then on the corners, I'm going to kind of open it up while still on the outside. Doing that kind of creates a flat bottom, which makes it look a little more 3D, so it won't just lie flat on my side. And stitch the strap to the bag, and there it is, a gross old bag. Maybe it's like one of Sam's gardening sacks. Old reliable. So another thing that he has is a leather canteen, and I just had the scrap leather that I've just kind of generally cut into the shape. I was working with scrap pieces, so it's, yeah. And I've just stitched around the edge. I made these little loops that I can attach some sort of string to. And this is just a little wood finial that I've just painted and aged it up a little bit, and that'll kind of act as the little cork thing. I'm going to stuff it with polyfill to make it look like it's full without actually adding any weight to it. That looks pretty good. So there's only one thing left. Potatoes. Okay, so for potatoes, I'm using just a piece of felt. I'll cut it just kind of an amorphous blob shape. Stitched it, leaving an opening. It's flipped inside out. I'm going to stuff it with my big bag of polyfill. I'm going to stitch it closed. Now I'm going to take some embroidery floss, and I'm just kind of passing it through the potato, making kind of little loops, which is giving it little dimples. And there we've got a potato. Alright, the potatoes are done, and I made this bag out of just some loose twines and knotting it into a net pattern. And there's the bag of potatoes. And that does mean that the cosplay is done. What are those? These feet I made several years ago. They are just a costume rubber foot that I cut down, glued, and then also riveted to just a pair of regular shoes. And then kind of hid the seams and stuff with a patch of fur. Obviously they're in rather rough shape. I wore them out at the Renaissance Festival. And I've never fixed them up because, it just kind of looks like dirt. They work well enough. If you are going to make your own version of these, I highly recommend the rivets. Several years that I wore this out here, the glue just ripped right off and just toes went flying, and it was awful, and the only thing that's kept them on is the rivets. Don't trust glue. Okay, now what you've been waiting for. Here it is in all of its glory. I think this fabric turned out fabulous. All these lovely buttons, hand stitching on the shirt. Really like how these bags turned out. There's kind of a better look. With my, of course, bag of potatoes. I don't think I showed the prop pan in here, but this is just actually a foam pan. It's really light. The vest, of course, has the functioning pockets, as well as obviously this bag also holds stuff. I plan to tie my mug onto here so there'll actually be even more stuff hanging off me. If I can ever find a prop sword, he wears a belt with the sword, but I can't find one for less than $200, and that is like more than double my budget for this entire thing, so that's not gonna happen. Here's what the, I keep calling it a cape, technically it's a cloak. What the cloak looks like from the back. Ooh, get your feet checked. It is very nice, very large. This fabric color is really very odd because it can look green, it can look brown, it can look gray, but that's kind of how they are in the movies, so I think I got a good color. Here it is without the cape. I should probably take the bags off too. Just very simple, very humble, very Sam. There's the back strip. There it is without it, just the pants and the shirt. And then of course the back. There it is all full back together again. And here it is all on. Hey, I'm Sam. Dead accurate. That impersonation was perfect. Things that I would do a little bit differently and things that I may correct later. The pants are a little short. That is because I did actually drop down the crotch seam to make them fit a little bit higher on the waist. I'm going to correct that on the pattern in case I ever make these again. But because these have that kind of like weird little lip on, I can just cut a longer piece. And I think I've got enough fabric I can do that. The vest is also just a little bit too long. I'm not sure anyone would even notice that but me. It is very comfortable though. It is a little warm. I'm already starting to feel it just putting it on. But there's no beating that. The bags and stuff are actually really pretty light. The cape is actually feels heavier than the bag. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I think the potatoes are really fun. I'm very excited to debut this out at the Renaissance Festival. Alright, before I make the pants longer, I have just enough fabric width to get that second piece out. See, it's very large. And there they are lengthened, and they look so much better. But check out my vest. I'm going to take that in too. The vest before, and here it is after. And there it is all together. Yeah. Potatoes! Alright, and there it is back on the mannequin. Not a huge amount of difference, but still one worth doing. So I'm doing this as a supplementary bit about how I'm altering my Samwise cosplay here. So I'm lengthening the pants. The hem is just a little piece that's folded over. So I'm just seam ripping this off, and I've made just another little loop that's just the same thing, only 3 inches longer. I do serge my seam, which means there's multiple rows of stitching I have to cut through. It's great for stability. It means your garments will last, but it is a pain in the butt when you're trying to alter anything. It is such a messy process. Is a seam ripper that looks like this. They also have one that's kind of like curved. Basically just kind of like cut the thread. I don't like these as much because it's a higher risk of cutting the fabric. This is such a durable fabric though, it's actually working really well for this. But just another thing that's handy to have. SewingPartsOnline.com does sell a really cool kit with all of these. If you do a lot of serging, I highly recommend having one on hand. So I've just sewn that new piece onto the pants. I'm going to serge it again, and I just iron it. It looks so much better. As for the vest, I did make it a little bit looser, and I pinned it, tried it on, and I like it a little bit tighter, so I'm going to take that in. It is also a little bit longer than I want, about 2 inches longer. But if I shorten it, I'm just going to lose pocket space here, as well as the spacing on the bottom of the buttons. So instead, I'm actually going to shorten it up here in the shoulders. I made the armholes low enough. That's not going to make a huge difference. But that is going to spare me a lot of trouble having to fix down here, because basically I just have to take it in how I normally would up here. And you can see the piece is close enough. I'm going to probably have to alter a little bit of the neckline here, but that is far less work than trying to have to relocate a pocket or deal with buttonholes and all that. Unfortunately, this means that I basically have to take apart like almost this whole thing, but that's life. So you can see how it fits before I alter it. It's very long. All right, so I've taken apart the seams that will be altered. I've measured how much I'm taking it in, which is 1.5 inches, and I just cut it off. I took that measurement. Pins were still in. I noticed that I'm cutting from the edge of the fabric, not from the seam, because this is also accounting for the new seam allowance. I'm just restitching this, the edges of the seams that I undid. The next seam I'm actually lowering it a little bit, just because I did bring it up. Doing the same exact process for the side. Sewed up the seam, and here it is. Fits much better, looks better, it looks more like Sam, which is the important part. So yeah, a lot of extra effort, but well worth it.